Welcome to the Vitality Equation, exploring research in health and well-being one paper at a time. Today we're diving into a topic that's close to my heart, and I think probably a lot of yours, sleep. But not just sleep in the fluffy sense. We're talking about its architecture, and how it's deeply tied to our immune systems and the risk of chronic diseases. It's called The Role of Sleep Architecture in Modulating Immune Function and Chronic Disease Risk. A translational perspective. Sounds pretty intense, right?
Yeah, intense, but also incredibly relevant, I think, because we all know, anecdotally, if you don't sleep well, you feel like absolute garbage. But this paper's looking at the why behind that, the actual mechanisms, not just the feeling part, and translating that into what we can do. That's what really grabbed my attention. I mean, we're talking about more than just feeling tired. It's impacting our body's ability to fight off disease, which is huge.
Exactly. It's that deep cellular level stuff that's really fascinating. And it's what we don't really think about when we just grab a quick nap or pull an all-nighter. I'm especially intrigued by the translational bit, like how do we bridge the gap between this very specific science and practical things we can do to optimize our health? I mean, we know exercise has a massive effect on sleep, but how does the architecture itself change when you get a proper sweat session in?
That's a great question, and something I've been thinking a lot about. The paper goes into the different stages of sleep. We have our light sleep, our deep slow wave sleep, and REM sleep, the dream sleep. And it's how much of each of these stages we get, how they're distributed throughout the night, that really matters. It's not just about how many hours, it's about what your sleep looks like, the whole architecture. And they're finding links between disruptions to this architecture and things like inflammation, impaired immune response, and increased risk of chronic conditions like cardiovascular disease and even some cancers. It's pretty sobering stuff, actually.
Yeah, it's almost like your sleep is this internal, intricate dance, and when it's off kilter, everything else starts to fall apart. I'm thinking about the patients I work with and those who struggle with insomnia and how it's not just about the lack of sleep itself, but that disrupted architecture that's potentially wreaking havoc on their bodies in ways they're not even aware of. I'm particularly interested in how stress plays a role and how this whole thing becomes a cycle.
Oh, the stress piece is absolutely huge, and I've seen that in my own training. I've had periods where my sleep is just awful, and I can feel the effects on my training. Your recovery slows right down, your motivation dips, you're more susceptible to injury. It makes complete sense that the same system that's managing your sleep and recovery is also linked to your immune system and fighting off disease. They're all intertwined. I mean, we know intense training affects sleep and we see it with athletes, but it is also the same for people who are just trying to get healthy.
Absolutely. And it's the stress that triggers so many issues. The paper goes into detail about how during slow wave sleep, your body releases things like growth hormone and other important proteins that play a role in tissue repair and immune function. If you're constantly stressed, and that's something that I'm trying to work on myself with meditation, you're probably not getting enough of that restorative deep sleep. And then during REM sleep, there's this fascinating immune cell processing and memory consolidation. It's like your brain and immune system are having a nightly check-in and cleanup session. And if that process gets disrupted, well, it just leads to all sorts of problems.
Right, and that's where the cognitive piece comes in, because our thoughts and worries are often what disrupt that sleep architecture in the first place. You know, the racing mind, the to-do list playing on loop, that hyperarousal. And the paper talks about how that hyperarousal keeps us in lighter sleep stages, preventing us from getting that crucial deep and REM sleep. That's why CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, can be so effective, because it directly tackles those thought patterns and behaviors that perpetuate the problem. It's not just about forcing yourself to sleep, it's about changing those cognitive processes.
And it's a great point to bring up because I've found that focusing on the things within my control really helps. I mean, I can't stop life stressors, but I can absolutely change my habits, my sleeping environment, and my level of exercise. I've found that having a consistent sleep schedule makes a massive difference, and that being active during the day helps me fall asleep and stay asleep. The paper mentions that even a small amount of exercise can significantly improve sleep architecture, especially for people who are currently sedentary. It makes sense that a properly exercised body is a well-rested body.
Yes, and that's the key takeaway for me, that it is multifactorial. It's not just one thing, it's this complex interplay between lifestyle, our cognitive habits, and of course the exercise part. And the paper's perspective on how disrupted sleep architecture relates to chronic inflammation is pretty scary. Inflammation is implicated in a huge number of chronic diseases: heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, and even depression and Alzheimer's. And all this seems to come back to disrupted sleep. For me, this has pushed me even more to prioritize things like sleep hygiene, creating a calm environment before bed, the meditation part, and being very strict with my wake-up time and bedtime.
It's really powerful when you understand that link. You mentioned sleep hygiene, which is so important. I try to talk to my patients about that, creating a calming evening routine, avoiding screens before bed. But it's more than just the habits, it's the mental preparation too. I've started incorporating a sort of brain dump exercise before bed where I just write down all the thoughts that are swirling around, just to clear my mind. It's like decluttering the mind for the night. It's very much linked to the cognitive perspective. You wouldn't go into your day without being prepared mentally. So why do we go to bed without being prepared mentally?
Absolutely. The preparation bit is huge. It's almost like training for sleep. You don't just show up at the starting line of a race without having prepared. I make sure I get outside early in the day so I'm getting that natural light, and then avoid blue light in the evening, which can throw off my body clock. I've also started tracking my sleep with a device, which isn't perfect, but it's giving me some data to work with. It's showing me the fluctuations in my sleep architecture, and I'm trying to correlate that with my exercise and my routine. I mean, for example, if I do a late training session, I can see that it affects the quality of my sleep, so it's a nice feedback loop.
That's really interesting. Using technology as a feedback tool, that's something that I think we should all do more. It's not just about tracking the amount of sleep, it's the sleep quality, which is the thing this research is really honing in on. The fact that our sleep architecture is so influential on our immune system is a huge wake-up call. It's not just about getting enough hours. It's about getting the right kind of sleep. It's like building a house. You need to have the right foundations and right framework, not just the outside walls.
And it goes back to that systems perspective, where everything is interconnected. You can't just fix your sleep without addressing other things in your life, like your stress levels, your thought patterns, and your daytime habits. We know there's a huge placebo effect in sleep, so just believing it will get better can help people. But also, that has to be paired with the practical stuff that we have been talking about to see real results. It's the combination of everything, not just one thing in isolation. That's really important to remember. I like that analogy of a house, actually very apt.
Yeah, and it is like that holistic approach that's key. You can't just train hard and eat well and ignore sleep because this research shows that it is as important as all the other factors. It is not just a passive event, it is a really dynamic process. The paper mentioned that disrupted sleep architecture is associated with a higher risk of type 2 diabetes, and that makes complete sense to me since I know how much my exercise and my sleep can impact insulin sensitivity. It makes me wonder what type of workouts improve sleep architecture the most. I would like to see research on that.
That's an excellent point. It would be great to see more research on that specific question. It's a bit like how food impacts our sleep. It's not just about avoiding caffeine in the evening, it's also about eating foods that promote sleep, like foods rich in tryptophan and magnesium that can help with relaxation and sleep quality. And again, the paper links disrupted sleep to poor gut health, which highlights the connection. And that's all interlinked, So if you have poor gut health, that has impact your sleep quality. Then that impacts your hormones and the ability to handle stress. And around we go.
It's a fascinating web of cause and effect, isn't it? It just shows the body is a single entity, not a collection of parts working independently. And I think that's why simple solutions often fail. You can't just take a pill to solve your insomnia. You have to address the underlying issues, whether it's stress, your thought patterns, or your lifestyle. And this paper highlights that cognitive restructuring and addressing maladaptive beliefs about sleep can really impact on that architecture. People can get caught in a cycle of thinking they'll never sleep properly, and that in itself is perpetuating the problem. This has a direct impact on your immune function, which is truly shocking for most people I see.
Yeah, and that kind of negative thinking can definitely sabotage your efforts. I've noticed it when I have bad sleep myself. It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. I am also wondering about different chronotypes and whether people who are morning larks versus night owls have different sleep architectures. If I could design a research paper, I would look at that for sure. Maybe some people respond better to high-intensity exercise, or others do better with endurance work. The paper says that the biggest changes in your sleep architecture occur if you implement those changes early. So I think that is something that young people should consider very strongly. It has implications for how they live their life. It's a lifetime investment in health.
Absolutely. The idea that it's a lifetime investment in health is so important. And it all starts so early. It's like cultivating a garden. The sooner you start, the better the harvest. This paper has given me a deeper understanding of how deeply interconnected our body systems are and how everything is influenced by sleep. It's pushed me to look more into the practical applications of these findings. For example, should we be having more naps? What kind of naps are good? Should I be prioritizing light exposure more? What does my diet need to look like even more specifically? I know it's individual, but having this in mind could make a real difference.
Yes, and the personalized aspect is crucial. Not all sleep strategies are for everyone, I think. We need to understand the individual patterns and tailor our approach accordingly. I would love to see more research looking at the effectiveness of different cognitive behavioral techniques for improving sleep architecture and how these are correlated to people's personality types. Are there better ways of doing CBTI for certain individuals? Because what I have seen it work for some, but not for others. So getting more data on the individual responses would be massively useful and would lead to a better quality of life.
And for me, it's all about understanding how exercise can best be used as an intervention so we can fine-tune training routines to improve sleep architectures and then ultimately immune function. And we need to look at that for different age groups and different types of people. I'm wondering if there are different types of exercises that work for different age ranges or chronotypes. For example, we know that older individuals tend to have poorer sleep. So what type of intervention can improve their sleep? Or we need to look at what specific timings and intensities are best. I also wonder about the effects of sleep supplements like melatonin and if these actually influence sleep architecture, or if it's simply a placebo effect. There's just so much we still don't know.
Yes, and I completely agree with that long-term view. I want to see more studies that combine the physiological and psychological interventions. So we aren't just working on the body, but the mind as well. And specifically, research into how we can create tailored cognitive restructuring strategies for specific sleep issues. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So more work to fine-tune these approaches would be very useful, and as I mentioned earlier, it needs to take into account people's personality and traits. That is very important to consider.
And I'm definitely on board with the personalized approach. I think the next stage is looking at the interplay between types of exercise, timing of exercise, chronotypes, and how all of that influences sleep architecture, and then ultimately immune function. If we can really dial that down and have more specific recommendations for people based on those factors, I think that would be amazing. And really, all of this research could really shift the way people think about sleep, instead of seeing it as a passive activity, but as this active and vital process that really dictates our health. So this is very exciting.
Absolutely. I think this paper and discussion really highlights the need for a much more holistic approach to health. It's not just about diet and exercise, it's about understanding how our sleep impacts everything, and about taking a proactive, conscious approach to improving the quality of our sleep, which in turn will improve the quality of our lives.
Yes, and it's about empowering people with the knowledge that their actions have an impact on their overall health, that they can take control of their lives. It's incredibly validating to understand that making those positive changes to our daily lives and our mindset can have such a profound impact. And I think that's very motivating.
That's what I'm taking away from this too. It's not just about sleeping more, it's about sleeping better and understanding how our bodies are constantly trying to work with us to improve our health. There are so many ways we can implement these findings and so much research to do. And I am excited for what the future may bring and how this will all impact health.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you for joining us in this fascinating deep dive into the research on sleep architecture. We hope this has given you food for thought and perhaps even inspired you to look closer at your own sleep and habits. Until next time, take care and get some good sleep.